In the recent Grand Prix, the Red Bull RB21 has made a huge leap forward. After a period of ups and downs, the Milton Keynes single-seater is back up front fighting for victory. And it did so with Max in Monza, and with Max and also Tsunoda, who performed very well in Baku too. In today's video, we will look at the secret of this rediscovered Red Bull. We will analyze the floor, and we must also talk about Verstappen, who won at the Nürburgring. And it's strange to say, but he won with a Ferrari before Lewis Hamilton did. Let's look at the results of Ferrari's Pirelli tests, and finally talk about James Vowles, who wants to abolish Friday and the sale of McLaren. Before we start, please leave a supportive like, and now let's see everything in detail. After Monza and Baku, the RB21 appeared more stable and faster. Sure, the layouts of these tracks have helped the natural characteristics of the car, but it's not enough to say that Red Bull has taken advantage of favorable circuits. There was a real technical step, as confirmed by Verstappen's results and also the growth of Tsunoda, who had struggled more so far to push the car to its limit. In Monza, Red Bull worked in the area in front of the rear wheels, modifying the management of the so-called tire squirt, which is the dirty air generated by the rear tires that can disturb the diffuser. The floor channel has been redesigned, and one of the entry appendages has disappeared. The goal was to stabilize the load when the car encounters roll, pitch, and yaw. Result: a more predictable rear, especially in changes of direction and corner exit. But on its own, this update does not explain the performance leap. Red Bull's real step forward was at the front. For months, Verstappen complained about understeer, which is the tendency of the car not to turn enough into a corner. So far, the team could only address the problem by increasing the incidence of the front wing. A not very effective compromise. The breakthrough came when the technicians increased the chord of the flaps. In practice, they made the wing profiles wider, generating more load and expanding the adjustment window. This way, Verstappen can find a more precise balance from corner to corner. But that's not all. The load is no longer distributed uniformly. The peak downforce has been shifted outward, generating a flow with more lateral component, the famous outwash, which helps the car be more stable when changing steering angle. And with this modification, the front has become more reactive and predictable, which means less understeer and more confidence for the driver. And it is precisely this that has allowed Verstappen to push harder and Tsunoda to get closer to the performance of his teammate. Now, the big question is whether this advantage will also be confirmed on street circuits, slow circuits like Singapore, where the effectiveness of the outwash and load management change a lot. And speaking of Verstappen, he triumphed at the 4 hours of Nürburgring, driving a Ferrari 296 G3 and won by dominating in a category that is not his. He moved everyone, and this shows us how Max is a 4-time world champion. But let's recap the weekend that Verstappen faced. All it takes is a Ferrari 296 GT3 and Max Verstappen behind the wheel to remind everyone that the passion for motorsport is much stronger than any polished strategy devised by Liberty Media. The Dutchman's victory at the 4 hours of Nürburgring goes far beyond a simple trophy. It shows that when there is real competition, the audience gets excited without the need for artificial shows. Max, after setting the third fastest time in the morning qualifying, took the lead already at the first corner, and after 2 hours had over a 1-minute lead over the rest of the group. A feat never trivial even for someone considered the strongest in Formula 1. The work was then completed by Chris Lulam, the young talent raised in sim racing, who teamed up with Verstappen until the checkered flag. It wasn't just a simple show. Max raced with the hunger and determination we know well in Formula 1. It doesn't matter that it was a GT race. When he goes on track, he wants to win. In recent years, we've seen drivers try other categories. Think of Fernando Alonso with endurance and Indianapolis, but often they were escapes to cover motivations. Max, on the other hand, is at the peak of his career and is showing talent that goes beyond Formula 1. Paradoxically, in this year when the championship title is more distant, Verstappen is building his image as a total champion, capable of winning anywhere. This success also sends a clear message. Verstappen is not interested in staged entertainment. The Dutchman races because he loves to do it, not because he has to become the perfect poster Liberty Media would like to hang everywhere. He is not intimidated by institutions and is not afraid to speak his mind. He doesn't build his image on canned interviews or formats designed to please the masses. He is straightforward, sometimes uncomfortable, but authentic. And it is precisely this authenticity that people perceive. The fact that Max won with a Ferrari has inevitably sparked the imagination of the fans. Who knows what it would be like to see him in red in Formula 1? The car was a Ferrari 296 GT3 in Red Bull livery, but it doesn't take much to fuel speculation. He himself, however, has already explained that a possible move to Ferrari wouldn't be just for appearances. It would mean taking on the responsibility of bringing the red car back to victory, because wearing that suit can't just be a trophy for his resume. For now, it's just science fiction. but surely someone in Maranello was watching victory closely. And let's also listen together to the statements of Max Verstappen, because they were very interesting. The Dutchman, four-time Formula 1 world champion, dominated the NLS race on his absolute debut on the legendary Nordschleife. It was fantastic, Max recounts. During my first 2 stints, the car was incredible. Even after qualifying, I knew that in the dry it would go well. Everything went smoothly, even with the traffic, and we didn't make any major mistakes. Winning my first race here is something special. The triumph immediately sparked curiosity about a future return, perhaps for the famous Ring Marathon. Of course, we really want to race the 24 hours of Nürburgring here, Verstappen admitted. I don't know if it will happen next year already, but we definitely need to gain more experience. We hope to participate in other NLS races to prepare ourselves, and it has a certain effect to see Verstappen win with a Ferrari, which has been a major rival for Verstappen, especially in 2022, and has always been the Dutch driver's rival. And this time they were racing together, this pairing that we might even see in Formula 1. Certainly Max will follow the winning team. So if Ferrari is not a team that can win the title, Max will not choose it. However, it does have a certain effect to see Max Verstappen race with Ferrari in other categories outside of Formula 1. But let's get back to talking about Formula 1, specifically about McLaren. Will we see the same limitations in Singapore as we did in Baku? Let's do a technical analysis of the Woking team. McLaren is experiencing one of the most delicate moments of the season. After a brilliant summer, the races in Monza and especially Baku have shown that even the MCL39 has weaknesses, particularly when low aerodynamic load and perfect temperature management are needed, conditions that could reoccur before the end of the World Championship. In Monza and Baku, Norris and Piastri couldn't confirm the pace they had until Zandvoort. In Italy, tire degradation was practically non-existent, a problem for a McLaren that usually excels when the tires wear out more. Moreover, the aerodynamic efficiency of the MCL39 is good, but not exceptional. In fast sections, it still lags behind Red Bull, while in slow sections it manages to recover. In Baku, the problems were amplified. Low temperatures, reduced mechanical grip, and difficulty in bringing the tires to the ideal window complicated the work. The result was a less incisive car, with performances far from the levels seen in mid-season. The next stop, this weekend in Singapore, should help McLaren. There's a hot and humid climate, medium-high load, and many curves where traction and thermal management of the tires are needed. Here, the MCL39 will be able to return to values closer to its strengths. The aerodynamic configuration will also be less penalizing, thanks to smaller cooling openings and an asphalt that tends to make the tires work better. The real crux will come with the final part of the season. Qatar and Abu Dhabi should be more favorable circuits for McLaren, but the 3 American stops are a huge unknown. Las Vegas will probably be the most critical, because it's cold with long straights and low load, a mix that had already troubled the MCL39. Austin could be tricky in the second part of the track, very fast, where Red Bull still has an efficiency advantage. And Mexico, on the other hand, could favor Norris and Piastri. There's a thinner air, high load, which favors the thermal management of the Mercedes power unit and the tires. The only positive side of the difficulties in Monza and Baku is the amount of information gathered. These data can help the team of Zach Brown and Andrea Stella to build a more effective setup when facing similar conditions, limiting the damage against Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes. McLaren remains a flexible and adaptable single-seater, but not invincible. If the weather and tracks do not play in its favor, the gap becomes noticeable again. The final part of the championship could therefore hold new traps, and it will be interesting to see if McLaren will be able to recover immediately in Singapore, as it should be according to the forecast, because McLaren is strong on street circuits. We saw it, for example, in Hungary. We also saw it in Monte Carlo. But if we think about Imola, Canada, for example, we saw a stronger Mercedes in Canada and a stronger Red Bull in Imola. So it's not certain that McLaren will dominate in Singapore. Last year it did, and this year it's likely to do so. But it's not a given. Let's instead see how the Ferrari-Pirelli tests went, taking stock of the 3 days. In recent days, Pirelli and Ferrari hit the track in Mugello for a tire development session ahead of 2026. Driving the Maranello mule car, adapted to simulate some characteristics of future single-seaters, were Charles Leclerc and Guan Yu Zhao. The goal was to gather useful data on the new wet compounds, but the weather disrupted the plans. The heavy and intermittent rain made it impossible to test the dry compounds as planned, forcing the engineers to focus solely on the intermediate and full wet tires. Pirelli, even without having a car that complies with 2026 regulations, has to anticipate the behavior of future cars, without direct support from the FIA, which has not developed a standard prototype for the tests. The Italian manufacturer is forced to rely on simulations and modifications to current cars to get as close as possible to the characteristics of the next technical cycle. In this context, every kilometer on track is precious. Real data helps correct virtual models and design more effective tires in extreme conditions. One of the main goals is to develop a full wet tire that is less extreme and more usable. Today, heavy rain tires are almost unused. As soon as there's too much water for intermediates, the race direction stops the session. Therefore, a tire is needed to fill this gap, offering grip and safety at all times without forcing the interruption of qualifying or the race. The conditions at Mugello allowed work to be done precisely on this front. Several runs with intermediate and full wet gave Pirelli important information on drainage management and stability with a lot of water on track. Leclerc completed only 25 laps in the morning with intermediate tires, with a best time of 1 minute and 34.914 seconds. In the afternoon, Zhou alternated between intermediate and full wet, managing to do a few laps with slicks when the track improved. He did 75 laps in total, with a best time of 1 minute and 22.12 seconds. Now Pirelli will analyze all the collected data and compare it with that of previous sessions. The next development step is already planned. More tests will follow after the Mexican City GP to define the final versions for approval. Once again, the complexity of Pirelli's work emerges, developing tires for single-seaters that don't exist yet. With evolving rules and few concrete references, despite the frequent criticism, Formula One's sole supplier continues to perform crucial work, ensuring safety and performance in increasingly variable conditions. So the Pirelli tests concluded with further testing of the full wet and intermediate tires to better develop the full wet and make it usable in a race, because it's unacceptable that as soon as it rains a bit more, the drivers can't run because the tire isn't suitable and reduces visibility in wet conditions. So a full wet tire is needed that drains a bit less water, but ensures enough grip for the drivers. At the same time, Pirelli will need to test dry tires, which will instead be tested after Mexico. Let's now look at the $4 billion valuation of McLaren Racing. An important valuation that was unthinkable 4 to 5 years ago. Zak Brown, CEO of McLaren Racing, confirmed the finalization of the deal that brings the valuation of the Woking Racing division to about $4.1 billion. The agreement, initiated in early 2025, stipulated that the Bahraini sovereign fund, Muntalakat, and the automotive investment group, Seven Holdings, already key shareholders, would acquire the remaining 30% of shares not yet in their possession. With the conclusion of the deal, the two entities now own 100% of McLaren Racing, completing the transition of the historic team under Middle Eastern control. According to Zak Brown, the value of Formula One teams hasn't yet reached its peak. The sport is growing in every metric, he explains. Liberty Media has introduced the budget cap, ensuring financial and competitive stability, and fans, sponsors, and partners are increasing. I don't think the values have peaked. Every discipline, after a record deal, 5 years later, the numbers are even higher. The McLaren CEO emphasizes that the demand for Grands Prix continues to grow. We have 24 races, but the real demand is for at least 30. Never seen such a competitive scenario. Last year, 4 different teams won and 7 drivers reached the top step of the podium more than once. Formula One is experiencing an extraordinary moment, and with this operation, McLaren consolidates resources and stability, strengthening its growth path in Formula One and other categories where it is present. The record value of $4 billion confirms how central the business of teams is today, fueled by global popularity, streaming platforms, and top sponsors like MasterCard and Google. And so yes, Formula One is in full growth, and indeed, some ideas are now emerging to change the Formula One race weekend. In fact, I want to pitch you James Vowles' idea, and I'd like to know what you think. Formula One continues to question the future of the Grand Prix format. After Stefano Domenicali's words in Zandvoort, a debate has opened on possible changes to make the weekends more compact and spectacular. The latest proposal comes from James Vowles, team principal of Williams, who has launched an idea destined to spark discussion: abolish Friday and race only on Saturday and Sunday. Vowles explained his vision. I don't think there are too many races on the calendar, but I wouldn't go beyond the current 24. The problem is that we ask fans to spend half of their weekend watching Formula One. We are already close to the limit. I would go on track only on Saturday and Sunday. The plan would be to reduce free practice to 1 hour right before qualifying. Less time to practice means more risk of errors and improvised strategies. Would it be a better sport if a McLaren qualified 15th because of a setup mistake? I think so. We would have more twists and an unpredictable starting grid. Despite the allure of the idea, bringing it to fruition presents challenges. The circuits rely on 3 days of events to maximize ticket revenue, especially on Fridays, when the grandstands and paddock fill up for free practice and sprint qualifying, particularly during sprint race weekends. Moreover, the teams have already shown fatigue due to the record 24 race calendars. Removing Friday would alleviate staff stress, but it would deprive the teams of valuable data and could lead to increased costs due to unforeseen errors or incidents. For now, Valve's idea remains an intelligent provocation. Condensing the weekend could make Formula 1 more raw and unpredictable, enhancing the spectacle on track. But among the economic needs of circuits, sponsors, and team logistics, the transition from 3 to 2 days remains, at least today, very difficult to implement. Let me know in the comments your opinion on all the topics we've covered in the video. As always, I remind you to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any news on Formula 1 and Ferrari. Here at Toto, see you in the next video.